Welcome to episode 23 of the Real Life Podcast. Today is as close as I've come to doing an emergency podcast. Having seen Dune Part 2 last week and then had the chance to discuss it a bit at the pub quickly, I realised that it would require a broader discussion, and I thought it would be a waste to do that on my own. So please welcome 5-time returning guest. Yeah, it's Michael again.
Hello.
Michael's back.
It's me again. He's got me here because I'm a Dune nerd.
This is exactly the point. I'm not going to be leading this. Well, I might be sort of, hosting it, but I think the bulk of the worthwhile notes are going to come from Michael here because I haven't read the books and you very much have.
Yeah, but we both saw the film.
We have.
We both saw the film. And I'll try and prevent myself from delving deep into niche lore to keep it relevant to the actual movies that have come out.
Well, I walked in and Michael just sort of produced the volumes that he got and I was like, oh Christ.
It's only the first 4.
And how many are there?
6.
36, counted them myself, delightful. So I'm going to let our resident Dune expert sort of take the floor with this in terms of its relevance to the books and its ability to carry that message over, and if it looks the same, if it feels different, whatever. And then I'm going to do a bit of sort of purely cinema-based discussion sort of after that chat. The themes of the book, I think, are obviously significantly complicated, right? Like, it's difficult source material, but they're important themes and they're worth talking about. So I think discussing them in depth is probably worth doing, and worth doing with someone who knows what the hell they're talking about. So,
well, shall we start off with kind of just, both of us have seen the film.
Yeah.
General impressions. As it's relevant to part 1 as well. Yeah.
When Nolan said it's like The Empire Strikes Back, I think he kind of nailed it.
Yeah.
It feels as significant as that to me. I loved it.
It's kind of the first sci-fi epic we've had since the original Star Wars.
Yeah.
Which I really liked.
I think so. I think the epic and the scale is sort of the beating heart of it.
Epic as a genre, the Troy movie or some shit. Genuinely.
Yeah.
Rather than just big. We've had a lot of big movies, but they managed to not be epics. Mm-hmm. I'm just glad, to be honest. Mm-hmm. I think it's this. Denis on a 7 or 8 film run.
Winning run right now. Yeah. He hasn't dropped a clanger in a long
really
time.
And to be fair, I read the book when the film got announced, but I didn't realise that it was Denis that had, he was a part of it from the start.
Right.
And, I love The Rival, love Blade Runner, all of that stuff. We did an episode on Denis Villeneuve. So when it was announced that Denis was doing them, I was like, okay, we're fine.
Yeah.
We're fine.
Which
is not the reaction of most people, because it has such a reputation that it got mainly from the Lynch version.
Yes.
In 1984, I want to say.
I think so, 84 for Lynch, yeah. Obviously, this has the benefit of having the patience of Villeneuve, right? So it doesn't go, here's 3 books, is it, that the Lynch version covers? The first book
No. So the Lynch book just does the first book, but it does it in less time than either of these films individually.
Yeah, which obviously feels like you're going to skip a lot.
They tried to do an adaptation in the 60s or 70s with Andrew Jodorowsky.
Okay.
And he had something like a 14-hour psychedelic script going on. It was apparently just crazy. Mm-hmm. He was actually very critical of Villeneuve's Dune. But I don't agree with any of his criticisms, to be honest. I just think he was kind of lingeringly annoyed because it's kind of, the epic that he never got to make.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, you said that there was a couple of themes which stuck out to you that you wanted to talk about. So what's theme number 1 that you want to go into?
Theme number 1 is the most obvious. It's half the plot of the film, where it's just charismatic leadership is a massive thing. So like we said just before we started recording, Villeneuve was talking about, when he was saying he's going to do Messiah, and saying that he wanted to stick more to the spirit of Frank Herbert's work rather than treating the text as gospel, as other people have tried to do. And kind of the main thing that Frank Herbert wanted to demonstrate with the Dune books is it's a cautionary tale against charismatic leadership and the focusing and the kind of the willingness of peoples to sign over their agency to a charismatic leader. Frank Herbert went down, I can't remember when the interview was. It was maybe a year or 2 before he died, but it was in, he said that the most valuable president the United States ever had was Richard Nixon, because he taught them not to trust their leaders. And the most dangerous president they had was President Kennedy, because everyone said, yes, Mr. Kennedy, thank you, Mr. Charismatic Leader. But it was Kennedy who first put boots on the ground in Vietnam, which nobody seems to talk about, because everyone loved old Kennedy so much. So his perspective on it is that a leader is a dangerous thing. There was a quote in Dune where it was like, I can't remember it verbatim, but it was like, the worst thing that can happen to your society is to be given a hero.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is exactly, in the film especially, they really emphasize that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the Lynch film, which I don't think was David Lynch's intention at all, he got like an hour of his script cut. Mm-hmm. But the Lynch film's greatest failure in my eyes, other than being like just kind of wacky, CGI wasn't really a thing, and you can't really do a story like Dune without good CGI. Yeah. But my biggest criticism of the Lynch version is that all this stuff happens to Paul in the desert, Harkonnen attack, and then at the end of the film when Paul's won, he like actually does miracles. He like sticks his hand in the sky and it starts to rain on Arrakis.
Yeah.
Like just magic.
Yeah.
Which isn't a thing in the book at all. Like magic's not a thing. Even though stylistically it's not science fiction, it's more like fantasy, but in space. It's kind of the only thing that makes it sci-fi.
Yeah.
It's straight up a fantasy book, but it's in space, so it's different.
We did have this debate the other day, actually.
Yeah.
Leaving the pub, we were going... I was talking about my favourite sci-fi film being Danny Boyle's Sunshine, and then we were going, actually, is Dune a science fiction film? And I was like, well, yeah, of course it is. And then you went, well, actually, it's kind of not, you know? Like, most of the elements you traditionally think about sci-fi, they're not really actually very present
really
in Dune.
In Dune.
Yeah,
no.
It's more about, like you said, like the fantasy sort of epic of sort of empire and leadership and factions.
You could easily do it in like a fantasy setting, kind of like Game of Thrones. Yeah. But Frank Herbert drew on... Everyone says that Dune is kind of like the Lord of the Rings of sci-fi. It is and it isn't. Frank Herbert drew on a lot of Isaac Asimov's Foundation. Isaac Asimov's Foundation is like the if Dune's the father of sci-fi, Foundation's the grandfather. Isaac Asimov introduced like the first galactic empire in all of sci-fi. That was Asimov, all of that stuff, and all of those influences come from him, as well as kind of the idea that science fiction tries to capture a lot more than fantasy is kind of ecology, specifically for Dune, is ecology. So when people talk about Lord of the Rings and what inspired Tolkien to make it, this is just kind of going generally into like Frank Herbert's vision, and what he wanted to communicate, and the main theme of the entire series. So whereas Tolkien, the main the lever on which the world turns is language for Tolkien, and the music of the world and the underlying. So when the world is brought into being in the Lord of the Rings, it's through song, and the singing and the music, and that writes the world. And Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings because he invented a bunch of languages. He's hugely influential in modern linguistics as a field. That was what he did at Oxford. He wrote the Oxford English Dictionary, for example. And his work on translating Norse sagas and things like Beowulf and epics like that led him to create his own languages and create a world for them to live in. Frank Herbert's version of that is ecology. So he was inspired to write Dune when he went on a trip as a journalist to sand dunes in rural Oregon, and wrote about how the locals had started planting grasses to stop the dunes from moving into the town. Ooh. And that inspired him to write Dune.
Right.
So the fundamental thing for him is ecology, and human ecology is a part of that. How do societies work over time? How do political systems evolve? How do religions evolve? From quite a cynical standpoint. And everyone thinks like Tolkien had these massive criticisms of Dune at the time because he didn't like the book.
Right.
To be honest, I think Tolkien's main gripe with Frank Herbert's work is the fact that Tolkien was a massive Catholic. So he really didn't like the cynical approach that Herbert took to religion, which is such a huge part of the book's plot. So when Herbert creates Arrakis with its ecosystems and its biospheres and the way that humans are plugged into that, whether they're alien to it, i.e. the Imperium, the Atreides, the Harkonnens, or whether they're ingratiated in it and a part of the ecosystem, i.e. the Fremen, that's him applying a kind of a variety of human ecology into his work. And those are the themes that he really wants to express. In terms of Denis' adaptation of that, I don't think there's a way to translate those ideas to film in any way.
As we stand, and Javier Bardem says, look at the grass, and we go, oh, fantastic! What an adaptation here!
Incredible
So
stuff.
glad they've got. I'm sorry they got the grass bit in. Yes, the film, you're right, is obviously playing with much sort of more spiritual and introspective themes and purely ecology. But what I think is interesting is how important setting is, right? Like physical, geographical setting, because here we go. Here's my Dune knowledge for you. The women with the massive boxes on their head and the veils over the front.
Oh, and they run the universe?
Yeah.
Bene Gesserit.
Bene Gesserit.
It's Latin for well-governed.
Right, okay. Their actual environment outside of their weird boxes is actually quite luscious and quite sort of green, you know, in terms of the little palatial spaces they find themselves in.
Yes, yeah. So the Bene Gesserit aren't a faction like any of the others, really. So you've got... The official way that the Dune universe works is there's a political triangle, and you've got the great houses. I'll try and not go too niche on you.
We're not gonna have a glossary on this podcast.
There's a glossary
in the book. Yeah.
So you can always cut this section if it goes on too long.
All right, that's necessary information.
But so there's the great houses, and they have their parliament called the Landsraad that they mention a couple times in the film. You've got the Emperor, who in essence is the greatest of the great houses.
Yeah.
And between those two, that's all of the militaries in the universe. You've then got the third wing of that, which is the Spacing Guild, who have a monopoly on interstellar travel and trade by extension. The kind of secret fourth actor there is the Bene Gesserit, who have infiltrated all of the Imperium and the Great Houses, and kind of run it from behind the scenes. And they're sort of the main vehicle through which Frank Herbert expresses that theme of human ecology and how human populations can be cynically managed, because it's the Bene Gesserit who set up, quite importantly in the film, all of the prophecies that Paul and Jessica then take advantage of. It's called the Missionara Protectiva, which is exactly what it sounds like, and it's basically a failsafe measure so that if a Bene Gesserit winds up on Arrakis by mistake, she can play into that and survive.
Whoops.
It's genuinely just a failsafe, quite cynically imposed by an intergalactic, behind-the-scenes manipulators.
Sure, because I think and that really comes into play in terms of where I'm sitting, not having the book knowledge, but when I was watching part 2, I thought this absolutely, to me, centrally is about, it goes back to the early stages, what you're talking about in terms of the dangers of having a heroic figure, like a heroic leader. I think this is about also the danger of prophecy and prophesizing that person, right? In terms of how, I mean, you know, it's in the trailer, and Zendaya obviously says it, like the prophecies, how they enslave us. The idea that, you know, if you give suppressed people a prophet to look up to, a hero to aspire and hope about, then that can just reinforce the structures of power which are keeping them in that suppressed position, right? That's exactly what it feels like to me. And again, there's an imperiousness to the Bene Gesserits which comes across, which absolutely feels like...
superiority complex.
Yeah.
The Bene Gesserit are also, and the Imperium and the Great Houses, especially the Harkonnens, they're all white.
Yes, exactly.
They're all European looking. Yeah. It's not very subtle. The Atreides are meant to have come from ancient Greece. The Harkonnens are meant to have come from old Finland.
Right.
Very much European.
Sure, yeah.
Imposing themselves on another society. One of the things that I think the film implies in that way, just touching on that, the film implies it but never openly says it, the book quite openly says it, is that the way that the Harkonnens exploit Arrakis and the way that the Atreides exploit Arrakis are equally damnable. Everyone seems like Leto from the part 1. Yeah. He's such a nice character. He's one of the only, like, you know, guys in the films that has like a head on his shoulders. He's the only normal down to earth guy. But he also means to exploit the Fremen, not by killing them, but by attaching them to his and kind of incorporating them and co-opting them into his colonialist regime.
Sure.
Which, yes, the Harkonnens would bomb them. The Atreides will still bomb them if they say no.
Yeah.
It's not like they're any morally better. They're just going about it in a different way. And then Paul comes along after the Harkonnens take back Arrakis and enslaves the Fremen through that religious manipulation. So Frank Herbert's basically showing how religion can be used as a lever to exploit people.
Yeah.
In terms of like where he's drawing his inspiration from in real life.
Yeah.
it's Lawrence of Arabia. It is 100% Lawrence of Arabia. But also, in the books, the Sardaukar ranks, they're called things like Bashar and stuff. And it's meant to bring up the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Turks. Mm-hmm. So he's called the Padishah Emperor, Christopher Walken's character.
Okay.
And that's an old Turkish title from when they ruled Arabia. And then, of course, you've got the obvious analogy, which is spices, oil.
Yes.
But because of the way spice works, it's like mix together the economic value to our current world economy of oil, crack cocaine, and semiconductors. That's spice.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's not exactly subtle the way it criticizes the way that our world works, in a way that Tolkien's world was an escape from.
Yeah.
Dune is quite, at its core, a cynical telling of the world as it is.
Well, then on that real life influence, then it's another thing we were discussing at the pub, and this is second consecutive podcast shout out to Ramsey. We found ourselves like slightly disagreeing on what the exact real life draw or real life inference of the Fremen in this film version was meant to be, right? Because obviously they're factionalized within themselves.
Yeah,
in terms
which
of the
does
film.
not exist in the book.
Right. So there's no, in the book, is there there's not a 50-50 of people who believe and people who don't?
No, and there's no north-south divide
Okay.
or anything like that in the book. The Fremen are a lot more generally, so Chani especially is a lot more submissive to Paul and kind of just goes with what he says.
Okay.
And a lot of the moral turmoil comes from internal monologue. So the way that Denis got around the problem that Lynch's film never got around. Lynch's film had like weird narration the whole time. Don't watch it. But the way that Denis gets around that, I think he actually played it perfectly in the way that he exports Paul's internal dilemmas. Like, don't get me wrong, Paul is still conflicted in the film, but 90% of Paul's internal dialogue gets exported to Jessica and Chani.
Yeah.
So it's particularly Jessica's shift after she takes on all the past lives and in that ritual.
Yes.
Because Jessica is now one among like 1,000 personalities, all of whom used to be Bene Gesserit, all of whom just want to do this plan. She's kind of outvoted. And you've got Chani who, and a much more nuanced look at the Fremen and how their culture works politically. Like they literally say Southern fundamentalists.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, again, it's not exactly subtle, but it's perhaps necessary given how modern audiences react to subtlety, which isn't well.
Which is louder!
So he manages to export Paul's internal dilemma to these characters and critically make it their character motivations. They're not like the angel and devil on Paul's shoulder.
Yes.
These are things that they want.
Yeah.
So the agency's not with Paul there, which is why I was really happy with the ending scene of Chani's character when she goes off into the desert
And retains her own agency.
Yes.
I did hear you say to Ramsey, like, the second you take away the female characters, look exactly what happens to him. He just becomes this, like, completely, like, power crazy, power hungry guy. It's like the second it goes away, it's like, oh, Josh Brolin's on my side, is he? Well then, world domination, I say. Which I thought was interesting. But in terms of the actual, like physical makeup then of the Fremen, the position I was sat at, again, having not read the books,
supposed to represent.
Yes, because I saw obviously various
in the book
different groups.
It's unambiguously North African and Arab peoples.
Yeah.
So they changed a lot of the Fremen language in the film, which I guess you wouldn't notice unless you could speak Arabic.
No, sure.
I didn't notice it.
Yeah,
I read it somewhere. But a lot of the Fremen language in the book contains straight up words from Arabic. And they justify that in the film by saying that there would be no way that, it's 20,000 years in the future. There's no cultural continuity there. And I thought, yes, but you're also making a film 20,000 years in the future with giant worms. Like, come on, you're taking some liberties here anyway, And I think my main criticism of that, which I said the other night, which I quite want to hear your thoughts on.
Sure.
Is that it's done disappointingly. This is a nitpick of mine because I do love this film. Don't get me wrong, but a big nitpick is that it? Does that work?
I know what you mean.
A slight gripe of mine is that it does what a lot of films do that try to, particularly in fantasy and sci-fi, actually, is that whenever they try to represent marginalized peoples, any sort of marginalized people, particularly from what would be condescendingly called the global south.
Yeah.
Instead of focusing on one particular people and telling their story, the way that Dune is analogous for the Arab experience of Turkish and then European colonialism, they kind of mix them all together and say all of them have been exploited at one point and none of them are special. None of them have their own stories. It's just good guy versus bad guy. Yeah. And they mix them all together. So I'm not saying that we can't cast or we shouldn't cast POC characters and POC roles. That's what Dune's good for, and that's why it's so kind of, even though it was written in the 60s, kind of a breath of fresh air, especially with this adaptation, not the Lynch version. In the Lynch version, they were all just white for some reason. But you know, the way that you can cast, it's not like race swapping characters that are from white European stories and making them non-European, which is like, what's the point in that? But it's a POC story for POC people, and they're casting POC people, and I think that's great. I disagree with the fact that it's just a general mishmash of kind of all marginalized people throughout history. Like, I think I wouldn't be surprised if there was some studio interference where they were a bit nervous, given what's going on in the world right now, to give to deliver a specially Arab story about active colonialism. I would not be surprised if, excuse me, there was some interference on that front.
Okay, I don't think that's a stupid viewpoint at all, and I think actually, you know, talking about honouring the source material, if its inspiration largely does come from Lawrence of Arabia and it's that kind of realm of story, I think that's a fair thing to bring up. As a purely film viewer, it did to me emphasise the sort of universality of this kind of danger of prophesizing, right? In that, you know, so like even, you know, one of the Fremen's Scottish, like that's one of the things we discussed, right? And then obviously you made the point that like, yeah, but eventually they just kind of joined in.
No. See, everyone thinks this because of what's going on in Scotland right now. And you know, I say right now, the past 10 years. Yeah. Everyone seems to think that we are not on like Ireland's level. We very much partook in everything that went on in Great Britain's name. You know, and if anything, we overrepresented ourselves. Yeah. So to see a Scottish guy cast in that, you know, and deliver that line was just sort of stupid to me, knowing what I know about my own country's history. It's just sort of like, it's just a bit dumb to me, and it just sort of emphasizes the fact that they've gone, oh, anyone who has ever claimed to be marginalized can be a Fremen.
Sure. I understand.
Whereas I would say that this is specifically Middle East and North African.
Right.
Experience that the book's trying to represent.
And so that change obviously feels like a bit of a stark contrast, right?
It does, but again, like...
Minor gripe.
It's a minor gripe, and it's an opinion that I formed entirely on my own, and I you know, I didn't experience it. I'm not Arab, you know?
Of course, I mean, as I say, I added to the universality of it, and I think the fact that the other great houses were so white, that very much hammered it home to me.
Tangent, but the artist, when you say so white, I assume you mean the Harkonnens.
I mean, obviously, primarily,
Yeah. That's a really great choice that wasn't in the books. But I love that
Baron was camp in the books, as you just told me.
Yeah. But a really good change from the books in part 1 and part 2 is that the design of the Harkonnens, how they're bald and hairless, and they all have quite severe alopecia. That is, again, just going back to that core theme. It shows that Denis knows what he's doing, and adding something that works so well is going back to that core theme of human ecology and how societies work, because the Harkonnen homeworld, as a result of the Great House Harkonnen's rule, has been polluted, and there's microplastics everywhere, and there's smog everywhere. So even though they have that cool as shit black sun that I assume we'll come to at some point, the real reason they're bald is that you know, Stilgar says that their body's water's full of chemicals. They're just not healthy. They're not healthy people.
And also, as you say, being representative of the Finnish, like they're from the northern north. Like they're not from the north, they're from the northern north. So obviously it's understandable. That is something I'm going to touch on, is the actual design of the Harkonnens itself and the world.
I didn't see a straight line. No. In all of Gaiety Prime.
No. To me the thing about the Fremen, and it's interesting actually that you say that there wasn't a 50-50, you know, divide between the two, of those who believed in Lisan al-Gaib and those who were very much sceptical and wanted this to be a Fremen liberation, not a Fremen liberation with.
I mean, one of the side characters, I think it's Chani's friend, explicitly says the Mahdi should be Fremen. Yeah, I like that they kept Mahdi. Mahdi is vaguely analogous to Messiah, but it's got completely different cultural roots. It comes from the Islamic tradition, and it roughly savior. So in like Twelver Islam, which is what Iran is, Twelver Shiism, the Mahdi is the 13th Imam who will come to save the world and rewrite the world.
Okay.
But in Sunni places, so they talk about it a lot. Erdogan started dropping stuff in Turkish media about the Mahdi.
Did he?
As well as, in Sudan in the 1800s, there were the maddest wars when there was a religious prophet. That's, something nodding towards. And obviously, aesthetically, even if they haven't cast all the extras right, aesthetically, it leans heavily towards Middle East North Africa.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's not too, that's why it's a nitpick. It's not too egregious,
Mm-hmm. But, I don't know, I kind of, having not had the book influence and stuff, and not, I was aware of the Lawrence of Arabia thing, because obviously the palettes of them are actually quite similar, apart from anything else.
Filmed in the same locations.
Yeah, but I wasn't. It wasn't sort of front and center of my mind that this is an exclusively sort of Middle Eastern sort of Arabic experience, and I think that the makeup of the Fremen sort of just kind of worked for me. I wasn't questioning it too much. I didn't find myself.
It's not too offensive.
No, I know.
It's
Yeah,
not,
but like. That's an interesting change. One thing I did want to talk about, actually, I want to how much in the books, right? How much of a personal, and obviously you say there's not that much of a divide between North and South in the books, right? What I want to know is how much deliberation does Paul go through in the book in terms of taking the what's it called the Water of Life?
The Water of Life.
The Water of Life, because to me, when he was in the film, when he was. He was very certain about staying with the Fremen in the north, right? And then the move to south felt really quick.
Attacks.
Yeah.
What's critical in the film is that he didn't see Fade Routher coming. So there's a difference in information available to Paul before and after he takes the Water of Life, because that's when he doesn't become the Lisan al-Gaib. I want to touch on that.
Sure.
But he does become the Kwisatz Haderach, which is the Bene Gesserit super being that they've been trying to breed.
Right.
Actually, that's a really important distinction, which kind of nails the theme of the
Bene
book.
Gesserit version of that figure, not the Fremen
is
version.
the Kwisatz Haderach, but no one is the Lisan al-Gaib, because the Lisan al-Gaib is made up to control people.
Of course.
Kwisatz Haderach is like a scientific term
Yeah.
for this supervision guy that the Bene Gesserit have been breeding.
Yeah, through worm blood.
No?
Not well. Hang on, they killed a worm and then took some stuff out of it. No?
Oh, that's just a drug. The Kwisatz Haderach is just like the right genes.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And what? So the drug helps. The drug was an enabler for
the drug helps.
Oh.
So when Jessica does it, and Paul's like, "Oh, she did nothing special." Bene Gesserit are trained to do that. So the way you become, it's called a Reverend Mother. It's like the cool Bene Gesserit, who apparently in the film can do telepathic communication, but like again can't do that in the book. Which also caught me off guard. I was like, which I get why they did it, because it made the scene so much easier.
But that was in the first film, wasn't it?
I don't think so.
Was there not some sort of
there's the
telepathic?
voice.
Yeah.
That's not telepathic.
Is it not?
The voice, there's no magic, or he tries to avoid it as much as he can.
Right, okay.
So what the voice is, and it's a really subtle thing in the first film that you would not notice if not even if you just read the book, but if you're just a complete nerd like me. So when Paul tries to use the voice on his mum, like one of the opening scenes of the part 1.
Yeah.
The breakfast table. When he uses the voice on her, and it almost works, the voice that comes out of his mouth is the voice of Gaius Helen Mohiam, who's the old lady who comes to test him.
The one with the box?
The one with the box.
Right, okay.
That's because she was Lady Jessica's teacher when she was becoming a Bene Gesserit. So the voice isn't magic. It's just knowing the right tone to emulate that someone fears and that you can control them through. So she fears Gaius Helen Mohiam.
Right.
So he realizes that that's the right pitch and voice to use to control her.
Got it.
So it's like advanced psychology. It's not magic, but it's totally magic. But it's not magic.
Right. I got it. Yeah.
That's how that works.
It isn't.
Where were we?
On the deliberation front between staying with the Fremen and then becoming...
So he the way that he becomes the Kwisatz Haderach, and critically not the Lisan al-Gaib, because that's made up and it's just a tool to control people.
But what it's perceived as...
So he becomes this Kwisatz Haderach by taking the drug, which unlocks his past lives. The way Jessica did. And the way you do that physically is the Bene Gesserit, like Jessica did, is explicitly said in part 2, is they have control over their own biology, so they can chemically change poisons inside of them. It's how they choose the sex of their children. So Bene Gesserit does that, Lady Jessica does that and transforms the poison, and that unlocks her past lives. Right. And the reason, and she does that while she's pregnant, which is why Anya Taylor-Joy's character, who I hope is in the next one.
You seem so.
That's why she's so weird, because she got access to all of these old personalities before she had her own personality.
Okay. I didn't know she was
See what
weird.
I mean? Like, it gets wild, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, but I
gets
didn't know she was
absolutely-
weird because I got 2 seconds of it in this one.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was
exactly.
going,
That's a really big book change. But the when Paul does it, there's a real difference in the amount of information available to him.
Okay.
So before he takes it, he has random visions. He can kind of lull himself into them, but he doesn't know what he'll see. It won't be with clarity. He doesn't know what's going to happen and what's not. Like, he keeps seeing Jamis as representative of like alternate futures that could have been. And then he takes, because Dune is about an anti-hero, not a hero. So he takes the water of life and it's like, bam, we get way less of Paul. We get none of the slow scenes with him. The pace of the film speeds up rapidly, it picks up so much. Because time doesn't work the same for Paul after that point. He now has perfect sight of the future and the past. So he's experiencing everything at once, all the time. Every decision he's going to make has already been made. Which is why the film speeds up and speeds up and speeds up. And you switch to the perspective of the characters who don't have that. In the book, it's slightly different. But in the film, it's like... the quote from the book is that even if Paul dies and doesn't do this himself, the Fremen already have their Messiah.
Right.
So Paul makes the choice that it's better for him to live and carry out this holy war and have some control over it.
Sure.
Because by the time Paul gets his perfect sight, he'd already made all those decisions when he couldn't see that have determined that the holy war is going to happen no matter what.
Okay.
So the best possible future is one where he at least has some control over it.
Sure.
But he still does all this awful stuff. It's not a justification, but
Right.
it is an explanation.
Right, okay. That makes sense. I would also like to say...
So that's why that scene's so important, is that's when Paul turns into this kind of cold character.
Yeah.
And the switch in tone is instant, because
it is.
Chani resurrects him critically, not by herself. She gets forced to do it by Jessica, which again is just a nice touch, communicates all of the character motivation.
But also, is it not a tear from her, which is the thing that makes it happen? Is it a tear or a kiss or something? Because the sort of evil of that is that presumably the Bene Gesserit would be very well aware that if that was going to be if that was going to be a crucial factor or whatever, then she wouldn't be pleased with the outcome, right? She would want him to stay
himself,
stay clean, stay as Fremen as possible, right?
Yeah.
And so in a world where she has to then become the final piece of the final little trigger for him to switch over to that cold side, that's a very cold thing to make someone do.
Yeah.
That's a very cruel thing to do.
Yeah, Jessica doesn't give a fuck at that point in the
No.
story. She's very cynical, wants to exploit the Fremen, wants her revenge.
Yeah.
So does Paul to some degree. That's why he does the whole like insurgent thing for the first half of the film. You know, like.
Well, so do you think that's not genuine then? You think that's not? You think he doesn't actually want to be a genuine sort of fighting alongside?
In the book,
Fremen?
he's very torn.
Right.
He likes the Fremen. He loves their culture.
Because I loved that. I loved that thing of having. And again, it came back to the prophecy.
Every step he takes in that direction to go to where he feels like he belongs, and to where he feels like he's safe, and to where he feels like he can get revenge on the people who murdered his family and all of his friends.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that. And continue to exploit these people who he feels like he belongs with. Every step he takes closer to them, even if it's with the best of intentions,
Gets him closer to Holy
gets
War.
him closer to the Holy War.
Right. Okay.
So it's kind of this, not heartbreaking because he does the wrong thing, but like a heartbreaking dilemma between, where you feel like you belong and where you're accepted. But knowing in the book it's his terrible purpose, this looming feeling.
Sure.
So before he has perfect sight, it's this looming feeling that there's something, and he's kind of desperately doing everything he can to avoid it. In the book, it's handled very differently though, because there's a bigger time jump,
Right.
which is by far and away the biggest difference, book to film.
Okay. Because I was thinking, watching that, I thought that little, like that internal battle he was having himself was actually the thing that I was most invested in the whole thing, right? Was this idea, and again, it comes back to the idea of prophecy being central, right? Because he's going, he's fully aware of what is supposed to be predestined for him, right? And I'm sure he's also fully aware that Holy War is coming, right? No matter what he does, right? But I liked the fact that, and obviously Timothy Chalamet has like a relative baby face. I like the fact that he still played on this sort of slightly juvenile want of putting it off. You know the way that you put off anything that involves any responsibility?
Yes.
Right? I say you, plural here. I wasn't targeting Michael.
It's not wrong.
I liked that battle, that personal thing with himself, and that was the reason why I noticed, and it's obviously because of the attack that he then has to go and do it and switch on the dime, right? But I loved that deliberation process, and I could have from a filmmaker, again, doesn't necessarily stick to the book, but I could have enjoyed a lot more of it.
He cries in the open desert, which
Yeah.
is like a huge taboo.
Sure.
You know, don't waste the water.
Yeah, exactly.
And nobody questions it.
Yeah.
What I will say in the book, it's handy. Do you want to know how it happens in the book? Because in the book, there's a 2-year time skip.
Oh.
Whereas that whole film takes over the course of like 9 months.
Sure.
You just track it through Jessica's pregnancy.
Yeah.
There's a 2-year time skip. Him and Chani have a kid.
Do they?
Yeah, they have a kid.
That would make the change a bit more devastating, wouldn't it?
Yeah. But what happens in the change is that Fade Rautha also has way less of a role, Austin
Right.
Butler's character.
Okay.
But what happens is there's an attack by, it's the Harkonnens or the Sardaukar, or I can't mix up, the Emperor or the Harkonnens.
Someone
Does an attack on the Fremen when Paul's not there, and his kid dies.
Oh,
And
right.
he doesn't see it coming.
Oh, okay.
And that persuades him that he has to take the drug. And
You
get
see,
sight.
obviously, I think the film is paced so well. I think it does so much because obviously it had a lot of ground. Despite how great the first one was, it did have a lot of ground to cover.
Mm-hmm.
But I was so hooked on this will he, won't he, when will he concept that something like that, I would have really enjoyed. It's not actually a criticism of the film because I think what the film did was great.
The right thing to do in a film adaptation when you crunch for time
Yeah.
is have the Harkonnens or the Emperor or Fade Rautha's attack
Yes.
kill like Stilgar
Yeah.
or Chani
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah.
something. But there's such
some
huge
sort
characters.
of imminent threats.
There's
yes.
such huge characters
Yeah.
in the rest of the story that you can't really do that.
Right.
So just doing it like destroy the Fremen's home and their water cistern. That makes sense.
It does. It completely makes sense. And again, that's not like a big gripe with the film, but I
don't have a lot of big gripes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's a 9 out of 10
film.
easily.
Yeah.
But I found myself really engaging with that personal battle, and I think something like losing a child and that being a motivating factor, because obviously that I feel like I would have been really emotionally.
But that's
impacted
still
by that.
the film and the book. The book just does it differently. It's more intensely personal in
Right.
the book. But the whole point of the book is that, like, Paul knows this could happen, knows it will happen, but his personal feelings get in the way.
Yeah.
He fails.
Yeah.
That's the most important part of Paul's character is he fails.
He fails.
He fails, and he becomes this prophet.
Messianic bastard.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm gonna come on to a bit of the cinematic stuff for it.
Yeah,
now.
let's put a break on book stuff and talk about goddamn Greg Fraser.
Heroic, right? The way that I've been, a lot of people when I said I've been to see it asked me, "Oh, how was it? Or, like, what's it like?" And I went, "Well, that's a very difficult question because this is batshit, right?"
It's big, is what it is.
What I thought about the first film, and actually I made a note of this while Michael was talking. I wanted to tell you that my order for the Villeneuve top 3 has shifted.
Oh, God.
Right? I adore Sicario, but it's now 4th on my list. I think I now, thinking about it again, I was far too dismissive of Arrival, right? So that's now 3rd. This is comfortably 2nd by a long way, right? And I think Arrival's wicked. I think the way it plays with time and perception is genius.
Yeah.
But and Prisoners has a place in my heart because I'm a cinephile above all else, and the techniques of doing it on small scale I loved, right? But this is so good, right? And the reason that
It's so good.
the reason that because I originally had Dune 1 at 3, right? And I think it's none of my opinions have changed on Dune 1 at all. I still think it's as good as I said it was. I still think it's
This
fantastic.
film does elevate it, though.
It absolutely does.
But it surpasses it.
Yeah.
By so
By
much.
some way. And because what I think the first film was doing, which is important to note, is it not only was getting people who knew the source material really excited by doing it properly and pacing it properly, finding the vocabulary to make a film version of this book, right? But it was also in its sort of, because it was a lot calmer in its pacing than part 2, right? It was also, for people like me who didn't know anything, really good at introducing you and getting you used to the world of Dune, right? And all the varying factions and
the
all the
moving
stuff.
parts.
Exactly. It embedded you in the system, right? And I I didn't need to rewatch it again before I watched this one. I was going to, but then I thought, actually, I still remember what it wanted to tell me. And so from minute one, I mean, there's a tiny recap, but it's nothing like the kind of thing you'd get, the kind of information you'd get from watching film one. But I was so ready to just go with it. And I think that's the real benefit of this film, is it's like, right, you remember that 3 hours of setting up we did and telling you all the stuff and giving you this great, huge, massive scale, beautiful looking
setting up
intro.
all of these things that could happen,
Yeah.
and yeah, like there's that one big action sequence halfway where the Harkonnens just kick their ass,
Yeah.
but like,
And it was like, we've done all that setting up. Are you ready? You on board? You strapped in? Yeah? You hooked onto the worm? Go! Yeah, go! And I was like,
we are starting like 20 minutes after the last film.
yeah, exactly that.
This
Which I thought
guy's
was
still
great.
in his body bag.
The bloke's only just died. And by the way, the opening sequence, when they were hiding away from the Sardaukar, right? At the start?
Harkonnens.
Oh, the Harkonnens at the
So
start.
the
Sorry, yes,
the
with
Sardaukar
with
are the
helmets on.
guys, because you'll know this because you're quite attentive when you watch films.
Sure.
But for the folks at home, the
You
Sardaukar,
lazy bastards. No, I'm
the
kidding.
Sardaukar, that's the Emperor. Those are his guys, and those are the blokes in the white spacesuits and the big glass helmets.
Yes, yeah.
Who come down in the first film, and they're the ones that kick the Atreides' ass, and then in this film they come down in the big mirror ball.
Yes, they do.
With
yeah.
the Emperor.
And then have a sort of courtroom scene at the end.
Yeah.
I wanted to the Harkonnen just floating down to the earth
In the first
opening scene,
Yeah.
and then flying back up. I was looking at it going, how the fuck have you done? This is unbelievable.
Okay, so I get the first pan up because that's cables, but then all the other ones. What the
and then he fucking zooms, and it's like, and he just lifts off, and I'm like, I just couldn't wrap my head around it. And I was watching it going, this is unbelievable, and it set the tone, right? Because like you said, it was only 20 minutes or whatever from
it's
after
like
the first one,
20 minutes at a guess.
Yeah.
It's like 30 seconds after we
exactly
left off.
the Fremen that he fought. He's just
it's
died
the same day.
Yeah.
yeah. And it's like
and-
the eclipse
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
as well, and it's very well done. And
it's
you just-
so beautiful.
But that's just kind of almost continuing the part one's work of just sort of this is life on Arrakis.
Yeah.
This is how it works.
And it was a subtle reminder as well that, like, because we ended the film one with the Fremen, right, and this sort of, but it was like, yeah, this isn't really the place to be on Arrakis, right? You know that these are the people that have got it about as bad as it can get. You know, like,
and also Javier Bardem says to Javier Bardem says to Paul and Jessica, they're not here for you. They're here for us.
Yeah.
This is our story now.
Yeah.
And it's a nice shift from part one in that way.
Yeah.
This is about us now.
yeah, we're in a different arena now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I also quite liked that. I mean, it's fairly obvious given the Harkonnen attack in the first film, but there's almost everything that Paul does in this film is in the desert, right? It's very much him situated solely amongst in Fremen territory.
Yes.
And then obviously after the incident, he then gets himself back into the palatial courtroom or stuff to deal with the Emperor, right?
Yeah.
When people ask me how to describe like what the film is like, I describe it as this: it is, in the best way possible, the most visually beautiful, hugely scaled, star-studded adaptation of Monty Python's Life of Brian that I have ever seen, right? And I mean that in all the best ways possible. Because, listen, that was triggered by Stilgar. Because he basically says, like, only the true Messiah denies his divinity
He's
or whatever.
too humble to
Yeah,
say
he's
that he's
exactly
the
right. And
Messiah.
they literally made a gag out of it. Like, people were laughing in the cinema
Yeah,
when that
yeah,
line was
like-
said. Like, he might as well have said, let us, like him, hold up one shoe.
It's the same. It's the same as in part one, where at the 20-minute mark, it's like, here's the one joke this movie.
Got it? Good? Yeah? Right, okay.
Jason Momoa did it last time.
Sad day.
Javier Bardem, you have
Does it
the
this
one
time.
joke of
Yeah,
the film.
I know. But
I think Stilgar's in this adaptation. I just forget the book for a second. He's quite a sad character.
he's a really, really sad character. And I really noticed it the more it went on. Like, obviously at the start
He's
you
been
go...
waiting his whole life for this.
for the Lislan Al Gaib, and he thinks he's found him, which obviously means I think we're going to be setting up for some Javier Bardem-based disappointment in film number 3. But what I thought was really
You're
interesting...
bang on the money there.
Yeah,
He falls right out of love with it.
Okay. But, at the start, obviously, I was very aware of it because of teaching and education and all this kind of stuff. I'm very aware of the fact that, like, prophesizing someone like that and making them messianic is a really bad idea. Like, that's a really crap thing to do.
Yes.
But even at the beginning, it happens, right? And even at the beginning, you're going,
well, you look at...
he's still got all of his perfectly good Fremen morals, and he's just got this thing that it's like he's just having a faith in something, you know what I mean? And then the longer it goes on, the more you go, you are too far, you've gone way too far into this, and actually...
But you never stood a chance.
Yeah, exactly. This was hopeless from the get-go, and it's only now, as things progress, and I see Paul getting closer and closer to that decision, that I realise you're about to hit this big time and hard, and it's going to hurt. And I thought that was a really well done bit of the film. I just love that. And it comes back to that Life of Brian thing, because it is a completely ridiculous film, like crucifixion, good, all this kind of stuff. But it makes an incredibly good point.
A worthwhile point.
A perfectly worthwhile point about religious messianic figures and the ridiculousness of the world surrounding it, like the Judean People's Front, fuck off, with the People's Front of Judea, all this kind of stuff. Like it, and it fits in, obviously, and Dune takes those ideas, obviously, from the source material, and then does it in the brilliant, sort of taking it seriously, huge scale, beautiful, philosophic kind of adventure way, you know. And I think a film needed to do that, and that might be why I got on with it so much, because I was watching it thinking someone needed to do this needed to be shown that this can be done, right?
Because the book's not about, if you look at its real world applications, the book's not about, you know, like Frank Herbert did not expect Al-Mahdi to come out of Arabia and conquer the world. Frank Herbert was very concerned about people like Jim Jones and cult leaders who got people to drink poison Gatorade and shit. And he was very concerned about people like Kennedy and people like Reagan and all of these things who could marshal up. Because, you know, he spoke about a lot in interviews about, you know, how do you convince an entire European nation to round up 6 million Jews and 3 million Gypsies and do that? This is Frank Herbert's answer to how that happened. Is group psychology is a dangerous thing.
Absolutely. But I also think possibly the best bit about the film, aside from the Monty Python stuff, is it is absolutely a love story. Yeah. It doesn't shy away from that relationship with the Zendaya character, right? And by making that central, I did still get an emotional hit from Paul changing over, right? Yeah. And I still cared, right? And I thought I was, and as I was completely on board with that character at the end, making the choice to just leave this world and go back to some sort of simple Fremen territory life, because that is the sensible thing to do. And she sees it right from the start as well. And the fact that it was primarily about prophecy and the danger.
Chani never gives up on her beliefs.
Yeah, exactly.
Stilgar doesn't either, but they have different beliefs.
But they've got different beliefs, right? I was sold by them, and this is what I was going to say: is I think it's the best I've ever seen Zendaya.
I think she stole most of the scene she was in.
Yeah,
I would say that.
She
didn't dominate the film. She didn't. Also, Austin Butler came out of nowhere and was one of my favorite performances in the film.
It's great.
Didn't expect him to be like, because the book character of Fade Rautha is not very intimidating. He doesn't do much.
Right, but he was
like at all
terrifying.
He was Austin Butler was fucking terrifying.
Yeah. But that's a point in general.
It's ridiculous if you look at what that scene, the arena scene. It's ridiculous when you look at what that scene actually is.
Yeah.
It's like, the birthday boy didn't get to kill his drugged up prisoner, but he still manages to be so intimidating. Yeah.
Like he's literally surrounded by the fucking witch looking guards who are closing in on the other Atreides guy.
I have something really cool
Go
to say
on.
there. Do you know what they are?
I don't
can't remember
actually.
the Spanish word, but when you have bullfights, you have these guys at the edge of the ring who kill the bull or hurt the bull and get it to go towards the bullfight.
Right.
The bullfighter, who then kills the bull. And if you look in the first film, there's this whole motif of Paul's granddad was a bullfighter.
Yes.
And there's the bull's head and that statue of the matador and the bull.
Yeah.
The Atreides are the bull going into the Harkonnen trap.
That's great.
So when you have, in the second film, just kind of a repeat of that, these Atreides soldiers with these literal bullfighter things, and if you look at their costume, there's this weird alien, weirdly sexualized, but in like not a sexual. I don't know how to explain it. It's
like a very trim figure, sort of.
Yeah. With their leotards, and they have the big ass alien bull horns. That's what that is. It's a continuing of that motif.
That's really cool. I hadn't thought of that, but that is really cool. Like like you're saying, like that in that scene. It is just sort of
to hell with it. Actually, let's just talk about the arena scene.
I was going to get onto it. Right, it's like in Foxcatcher when Steve Carell's
technically
fucking advisor pays the guy he's fighting to lose. It's exactly that, right? He was very much in danger of losing to that Atreides fighter,
who is in the first film.
Right. Okay.
He's the guard commander. He has a few lines. He's got quite a few minutes of screen time.
Sure.
He's not a named character, but he does have quite a bit of screen time, which I just thought was a neat choice.
Yeah.
He's also the stunt coordinator.
Oh, is he?
Yes.
Oh, well, good on him. Congratulations, sir. But, like, what I thought was interesting was that was obviously set up and all that kind of stuff, but the Baron was still excited by the prospect of him having to do something by himself. Like, when it got to the stage when he realised, he's like, you know what? Let's actually see what you can do. Rather than this rigged setup when you look very impressive and you've done X, Y, but, like, let's see what a real challenge looks like. And that comes down to...
and the Bene Gesserit character, Leia Seydoux's character, gets to say plans within plans.
Yeah.
Because it's the Baron's plan within a plan to test Fade Rautha. That is such an important line from the book, and it's not even applied the way it was applied in the book, but I'm just really happy they found a way to worm it in.
I found a way to get it in. Well, what's his bloody name? Glass Onion, massive, 2049.
Dave Bautista.
He is useless enough for the Baron to want something from
Fade
Rautha. And I think what is genuinely quite interesting is, and again, I don't know what this is like in the book. It seems to be that he's not an intimidating character at all in the book, right? But
he's intimidating, but in the way that the Emperor from Star Wars is.
Oh, sure.
He's more of a camp villain,
right? And because of his status,
and then the Emperor
as well.
is like that looming big bad.
Sure, yeah.
In the book, whereas in this film, the Baron gets a lot more of the looming big bad, and the Emperor is kind of a pawn in the Bene Gesserit game.
Yes.
Which is different, but it's a minor change. I don't care.
I think the interesting thing about it is that Austin Butler's character becomes actually successful. He does
he
retake control of the spice.
He restores spice production.
And what's interesting is that it's only through Paul's change that his rule comes under any threat. Yeah. Like, he has actually turned it around. He's done what the Baron asked of him.
That's one of the cut plot lines.
Okay.
From the film. We did not talk about the arena scene at all, by the way, there.
I was about to come back to it, but yeah.
But that's one of the cut plot lines from the book is Thufir Hawat, who's Stephen McKinley's character in the first film. Okay. The Atreides spy master. Yeah. He gets captured by, and this was all filmed. It's why I really hope they do a director's cut. But Denis says he doesn't. Denis doesn't want to. It's not his style. I think the studio will still do it. If it happens, it'll be because Warner Brothers wants it to.
They'd call it the extended cut, wouldn't they? Rather than
directors. Yeah. Denis like Nolan in that way, where he wants everything. The cinematic release is the cut.
Yeah, sure.
But one of the cut plot lines was that Atreides spy master gets co-opted by the Harkonnens. It's literally a line in the book. The Baron says, "We will woo the formidable Thufir Hawat. We will woo him." The kiss. He's behind a lot of. We'll put a pin in that.
Okay, come back to it.
Because that's another thing that they changed about the Baron. But his plot line is basically it's another plan within a scheme, within a plot, within a machination. Is the Baron makes Rabban, Dave Bautista, fail on purpose, because from the start he wants Fade to be his heir.
Oh, right.
So he makes Rabban fail so that Fade can come in and be a savior. Which is why in the book it still can't. In the film, Rabban has like 8 helicopters, or the flappy helicopters. Yeah. And Fade Rautha comes in with like flying missile battleship things, and it's like so yeah, that's a cut thing. The kiss is really good, actually, because the Baron's kiss with Fade, because there's 2 kisses in very short succession. First of all, the set design for that scene, it's like this Harkonnen cathedral.
Unbelievable.
Incredible. Anyway, the Baron kisses Fade because in the book, the Baron represents... At some point in the book, he does every one of the 7 deadly sins.
Okay.
He is a violent pedophilic homosexual in the book, and he has incestuous tendencies, and he focuses them onto Fade and Paul.
Oh, interesting.
He's a much darker character in that way. So in the book, Fade tries to kill the Baron a few times.
Right.
As that's just like how the Harkonnen family works. And the idea is that the Baron will know Fade's ready to take over when Fade succeeds in killing him.
Bloody hell.
Because it's like when he outwits him.
Yeah.
It's probably the darkest scene in the book, excusing the mass genocide, is Feyd hides a poison dart on the thigh of a slave boy that the Baron is... Yeah.
Genius.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's fucking dark.
Yeah.
So that's what the kiss is. It's a hint at those
that.
inner incestuous tendencies the Baron has.
Because I didn't know
what
that.
I liked about the second kiss, when Feyd kisses the Baron back,
Yeah.
is it's just going, this guy is fucked up. Him and Raban have both been completely fucked by the way that they've been raised by their uncle.
Yeah.
And I think that because it was improvised by Austin Butler, that second one.
Right. This is I was going to say.
I really liked that because the way that I interpreted that as a book fan, the way that I interpreted that was Feyd's kind of reclaiming his power,
sure,
and taking back his agency in a weird, fucked up family dynamic kind of way. But that's how I interpreted it.
Because the
film wanted to keep that 12A rating.
Yes, I was guessing. I would have put money on it being improvised. The second the kiss Austin Butler gives back, I thought there's no way that isn't improvised.
That's improvised.
And then you went.
He mentioned it
in
to
the book. The Baron's incestuous.
Apparently, Stellan Skarsgård quote was game.
Was game.
So they did it.
Did Austin Butler say that?
Yeah.
Did he go? He was game.
He was game.
I think everything about the Harkonnen design, set design,
practical stuff.
effects, colouring, costume, makeup, acting is absolutely perfect.
And you look at the arena scene, and they don't cheer; they chant.
They chant,
they
and
don't
they're
clap,
doing
they do the motion.
Linked hands, yeah.
The whole planet's a cult.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's so effectively communicated through that.
Do you know what reinforced? I don't know if this is in the book. What reinforced it the best to me in terms of how scary these people are is like most people would have, you know, in the classic masculine, over masculine bravado figure of power, like or your influence or something. So you know, Leo in Wolf of Wall Street, right? They've got hookers up in the you know, in the presidential suite of wherever they're staying. Or whatever.
The Harkonnens don't have hookers.
The Harkonnens have cannibals.
They have cannibals and slaves that they kill,
which is lethal to watch. I was watching it thinking, shit, like this bloody hell, this is hard stuff,
hard, isn't it?
I mean, and the fact that like he just killed those 3 slaves in front of the other ones, and then the other ones, instead of being like, shit, this guy's dangerous, were like, yum, dinner. I went. And
the one slave is holding the tray and her hands are shaking.
Yeah. So how in the book is that the kind of
well, the cannibals aren't there.
Right. Okay. So he's not surrounded by that kind of. Is he that kind of? He's not that playboy
that
type
kind of
figure.
Atmosphere, though.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I just thought, you know, interstellar playboy. Let's make him a cannibal. Let's make him have cannibals and stuff. I was like, yeah. Let's make this as weird as possible. I was proud of how genuinely strange it was.
With giving him Arrakis and the arena thing and all of that stuff, is the Baron is trying to transform him from the Harkonnen version of a playboy into the Harkonnen version of a leader.
Sure.
That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to mould Feyd.
Interesting, the Sight and Sound interview with Villeneuve about Dune Part 2 is really interesting. And in it, he talks about how he thought people were going to pass out when they were filming the Colosseum scene, because it was in Hungary, it was in Budapest in the height of summer.
Oh, the humidity
and the humidity
was
was nuts. And he was saying, but he's never had an actor as excitable and energetic as Austin Butler. He was just willing to keep going.
I've never seen him bring that kind of physicality to something.
Well, it's interesting you say that, though, because Elvis was such a physical performance. The electricity of Elvis was absolutely in his physicality.
I didn't like Elvis.
Did you not?
No.
See, that's interesting, because I've heard a lot of people talk about it, and I think it is a bit of a Marmite one, because I adored Elvis. I thought it was like, it felt like electricity to me.
I don't like Baz Luhrmann.
Right, and I'm not a big Baz Luhrmann fan, but I went, okay, so we need something batshit and wild and energetic for Baz Luhrmann to do. Oh yeah, let's give him Elvis.
Let's give him Elvis,
yeah, it makes sense, right? It just felt like the right thing. But anyway, I was going to touch on everyone's performances are just really good. I even really liked Timothée Chalamet in a role which I thought was
Timmy won me over as a leading man.
Completely won me over.
He won me over as a leading man
so easily.
Like we said earlier, it's probably like 40 minutes ago by now, but we said earlier that transition after he takes the Water of Life and the tone switches like that, and you get that scene where him and Jessica, they're not doing telepathy, by the way. It's a shared vision.
Okay.
They both... So the way that the visions work is that... Oh, here we go again. Is that because you have access to the past lives and you have the right... Your brain works and it has the right logic pathways and you've been trained to do this. it's not that you see the future through time. It's that you're like an AI algorithm that has all of the information it could ever need, and you predict it.
Oh, I see.
So Paul and Jessica have the same past lives, and they predict the same vision, and they share it.
So it's like you can know everything in the present in order to act out the future.
In the past, yeah. So it's deterministic in that sense.
Okay.
Dune is a deterministic universe.
Cool.
It gets really weird later on with Paul's son,
Right.
who has the same genes as Paul, is a more powerful version of Paul, basically. And it gets really weird, but we do not need to get into that.
No, probably not.
But the tonal shift is what I wanted to get at when they have the shared vision, and it's like the whole film. It's been bright colors, it's been deep reds and oranges, and it's been a very light, like lively, full palette that you're seeing, and you get this. It's dark, it's grey.
Immediately goes into a cave,
and it's immediately but it's not a cave like the Fremen caves.
No,
where it's nice, lovely, homely sandstone. It's suddenly dark and empty and cold.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And Paul's sitting there on the steps, and he's drowned in shadow, which was directly inspired by an artwork.
Oh, really?
Or I guess it was, because it's paralleled like that. So I really like seeing that. But and the way that his tone shifts, and that's where he completes his character arc. Is every decision that he can ever make has already been made.
Sure. Yeah.
All at once.
Yeah. Which is interestingly not that dissimilar from Arrival. The way that
time
aliens
works.
see time.
He in essence has the same transformation that she does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Time doesn't really mean anything to him anymore.
Yeah. And she understands the pain that's coming, but has to just head toward it anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. He made all the wrong decisions when he had imperfect sight, and now he knows he has to do this. And it makes it all the more heartbreaking when it's the final scene, or one of the final scenes, when he's just killed Austin Butler. Mm-hmm. Which, again, when he was having that conversation with Lady Jackie, you get the flash forward to the knife in Feyd-Rautha's chest.
Yeah.
But he's just killed Feyd-Rautha, and Josh Brolin says, "Oh, the great houses, they're calling your bluff, basically. What are you going to do?" And he says, "Lead them to paradise." And the way that he says that is like heartbreaking, because he knows he's failed.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then you get Josh Brolin coming back and being...
Oh, I love Josh Brolin.
I mean, he's wicked, isn't he? He's like
him.
henchman number one.
Henchman number one. He is literally Atreides till he dies.
Yeah.
And when Paul does the big badass speech to all the Fremen saying, "I'm the prophet, bitches," and he takes out his father's ring, which is a really interesting scene. Yeah. He takes out his father's ring, and Josh Brolin's so happy. He's like a proud uncle. It's great.
It's great.
I really like that they did that, though.
Yes.
He takes out his father's ring and says, "I'm Paul Muad'Dib, one of you Atreides." And then he goes, "I'm an Atreides. I'm the Duke of Arrakis." He waves it in their faces. "I am your oppressor."
Which is what his father never did.
Yeah.
As the point of his...
He completely shoves it in their faces, but they don't care.
Yeah. By that point, they're too accustomed and they're too willing to accept him. Which
is
interesting because
he says, "My authority over you doesn't come from me being Lisan al-Gaib. My authority
comes from being
the Duke of Arrakis and later Emperor." And he essentially completely disregards the prophecy that got him there.
Yeah.
But they don't care.
Yeah.
And that's the sad thing.
Yeah. What did you make... This is a side point. What did you make of the shots of the fetus? I've heard a lot of people have weird things about them. I personally think they were fine. I thought they were good.
Leans into the whole 60s psychedelic feel of the book, which I liked. 2, completely necessary given the time skip. So in the book, she's like a 2-year-old with full adult consciousness.
Right.
And she really freaks out everyone she talks to. And in the book, she kills the Baron.
Oh, really?
She gets captured in the same attack that kills Paul's kid.
So in the book, she's like a reverse Emma Stone in Poor Things.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, that's it, for what's relevant to this film. That's what she is. So I completely understand why they did that.
Yeah, I thought it was. I thought it was good, and as well, it settled.
The reduced time jump is one of the best decisions they made.
Yeah, absolutely. It settles really settles the pacing of it. It gives you reference points for the pacing of it, and also it grounds the story in a really interesting inspection of motherhood, which I think. And this is again one of the great victories that Villeneuve has over Nolan is his ability to make female characters worth watching.
I think female characters,
yes, exactly. Write them and yet obviously he's dealing with source material here, but he's still.
I mean, the source material doesn't do that,
right?
So.
Well, there you go. I mean, he grounds absolutely everything in the wisdom and the assessment of of these women, and you've got two characters. You've got the Rebecca Ferguson character, who's very much now gone the other way in terms of trying to move things quicker on and get Paul to fulfill destiny, quote unquote, as quick as possible. And then you've got the opposite side of Zendaya, and it's like it's a really interesting way of showing Paul's bad switch from one to the next, right? And by grounding the entire film in the female characters, it means that what could potentially be a very sort of testosterone-filled man is prophet, man do war, man shoot things.
That's the Lynch version.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it not that.
Man conquers nature because he rides the worm. All that.
Yes,
that stuff.
yeah. Which is so great is the fact that that's how Zendaya's character leaves. She goes by calling a worm, right? Because she's the truest.
The worms obviously serve as the metaphor for nature.
Yeah, sure.
That's what they are.
Yeah. But yeah, I loved that. I thought it was a really great choice. And also, I didn't think it felt like 2 hours and 47 minutes long.
It did not feel like 2 hours.
It went so quickly.
Yeah.
I was just so on board with it all. And
even though it's like way more fast paced than the first one, but then you get to the Water of Life scene and it gets even faster. And there's not much of a big battle.
Not really.
To be honest.
No.
But it doesn't need one because that's not what the film's about.
Another thing, the physical fight choreography. Nailed.
And the fact that they didn't score the final fight scene.
So this is what I wanted to come on to. The final fight scene's great because it has no score, but I never fully got on with the score for part one. I could appreciate it in all its glory for its ingenuity and so many people loved it and it won an Oscar and I was never going to be like, what a stupid decision. It just wasn't my favourite. This, I think, is amazing.
It's exactly what James Newton Howard did
in The Dark Knight.
No, with the Lord of the Rings.
Oh, really? Oh, right.
So the Lord of the Rings score in the Fellowship of the Ring and the Two Towers does a lot of what Dune Part 1 did. Obviously, they came out 20 years before. In that there's a lot of the motifs for characters and events and feelings in the story are introduced and developed. But it's only in The Return of the King that the music reaches crescendo, and there's resolution in the form of the themes that James Newton Howard introduces. What Hans Zimmer does in these films is he introduces motifs in the first film. So the Arrakis motif is the arrhythmic drums, and then the singing and all of that stuff. And you get the Atreides motif, which is those strings and then you get to part two, and the strings build and hit and they really hit. Properly, they finally crescendo. So like the montage where Paul learns to be a Fremen, that's the Atreides motif that's playing there. Yeah. And it's mixed in with the Fremen drums and all of that stuff. And then you get to the final scene of the film where, Jessica stood on the tower saying the Holy War begins, we're doing it. And it's a tragic version of the Atreides theme, but the theme's reached its resolution. It's a completely developed musical theme throughout the entire two-parter. So it's an evolving score between the films. Yeah. Which I liked. I thought it was neat.
Very, very nice way to put it. Yeah. It felt like that. It felt like, it had reached its conclusion musically. And I love that. Like, it developed on. And again, that's like the first film entirely. Like, the first film for me was about settling you into this batshit world, but absolutely taking it seriously and taking you with it. And the music, to me, was a bit like... I was almost overwhelmed by
it's more
everything
ominous
he was trying to do.
In the first film.
Yes, it is. Whereas this was melodic. The thing about when I did my episode about scores with Will and Roddy, right? None of us had John Williams in it, right? Which is interesting because he's made unarguably some of the most iconic music ever, right? Yeah. And what I think the thing about John Williams is you can sing his iconic scores, right? Whereas obviously everyone can hear Paul's theme.
Also, John Williams makes prodigious use of brass, which is the fundamentally European orchestral thing. Yeah. So I would find it quite weird. You've hit on something here.
Okay, sorry.
They spent $2 million to develop a bunch of native instruments for the fucking Avatar movie, and then didn't use any of them. And then in the big final battle where the natives take out the outsiders, it's brass that plays.
Avatar so much.
I hate Avatar so much.
Worst. Ooh, we're a thinly veiled metaphor for you. Shut up. Rubbish.
It's a failed Dune.
Except
it's Pocahontas, not Lawrence of Arabia. But that's what it is. I hate it so much, and you clearly hit on something there.
Yeah. So everyone can hear Paul's theme, the vocal bit, right? from the first one.
That's not Paul's theme. That's the Kwisatz
Paul's dream.
It's the Kwisatz Haderach
Paul's
theme.
dream theme. Sorry, but in this one, you can sing it when you listen to it once and then you listen to it again, and you can. It feels like it's settled in now to a point where it's like it's a recognizable thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's not like it's obviously you can recognize music for a film, but it's like it feels so ingrained in the world that it's in that it feels like it's gotten to that Williams-esque status where it's like, you think of Star Wars, you can think of the Star Wars theme, you think of Harry Potter, you think of Hedwig's theme and stuff, all this kind of thing, but like if you think of Dune, give it 5 years, you will first think of the Hans Zimmer music from part 2. I guarantee it.
Absolutely.
And I just love that. I thought every element of it was great. What's interesting,
the way that memory works, though, you'll think of the vocals and the feeling that gives you. You won't remember the entire score.
No,
you'll think of the drums or something.
Yeah. Coming back to that final fight then, when there is no score, which I think is a great choice. What's interesting to me is it felt similar to the fight that Paul had with the guy from the Fremen who he killed at the end of the first film, right? In that, yes, there was power shifts in it, but it wasn't that classic thing that films like to do of going, oh, he's losing, last minute he's won. It was like, it's pretty even battle, this. Yeah. Like he's keeping up with him, and actually on top on several occasions as well.
He does barrel flip over him.
Yeah, exactly.
That's sick.
Yeah, it was great. He's taking a hit.
I don't have any lower implications for you. That's just
cool. He took a hit from him, yes, but you could tell that he was so fueled with this desire to be number one, right? That it just felt like he was. It felt like he was in control. In the book. Is the Baron his uncle?
Grandfather, sorry. Yes.
Okay, cool, fine.
That's just another one of the wacky Bene Gesserit shit that's going on.
Sure.
Yeah.
I liked the death of the Baron. I thought him
die like an animal was good.
Him getting cut down from this floaty device.
By the Sardaukar.
Yeah.
In the Baron's last moments, he crawls towards the throne and gives into his base instincts. There's no thought on his mind other than just getting closer to that throne.
Yeah.
He gives into his instinct. He dies like an animal.
Yeah.
It's a nice touch.
Yeah, it is. And also it repeats that thing of earlier you had that you fight well, Atreides or whatever, and then that's the thing that kills off Austin Butler as well. But I think the only bum note I have is Christopher Walken.
I didn't like Christopher
Walken.
Who
plays Christopher Walken. It was just sort of him. Everyone else was doing something, I thought.
Florence Pugh was good.
She's
another kind of Anya Taylor-Joy-esque. she'll be in the next one.
Yeah.
Like Zendaya in part 1.
Yeah. And actually that is one...
She will have a big role in the next one.
Yeah, of course.
I promise.
But that is one of the really good things about it is this love story when he just casually... he goes over to Zendaya and says, I will love you as long as I breathe. Then goes back over to the Emperor and says, I'm going to take your daughter. And it's like, the duality of man. Aside from... Christopher Walken
in the book, the Emperor has a lot more agency.
Sure.
The Bene Gesserit kind of nudge him in the right direction, but it's not like the film where they straight up are calling the shots.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
But aside from him, and my own personal desire to see a little bit more battling with destiny from Mr. Atreides himself, I don't really have anything I can say that's negative about this film. No.
It's spectacular.
It's amazing. It is amazing.
And I think when you actually pay CG artists.
Yeah, right?
I am looking at you, Disney. This had a smaller budget than Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania.
Fuck off.
It had $10 million less dollars.
Oh, gosh. Jesus.
It's got to be money laundering. It's got to be.
It's got
to be.
I think it's aged amazingly. The CGI in Narnia, the first one, is unbelievable.
So good.
It's amazing because they spent time and money on it and didn't have 40 million other projects that they were dedicating everything to and just focused. This is what happens when you focus and you get someone in who knows how cinematic language works and you give them
and you can spend
time,
3/4 of your marketing budget on just casting the right people.
Yeah, exactly.
Because nobody's going to come for the story, they're going to come for Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya.
And then stay for the story. Yeah. That's the best thing about him, though.
So they just spend all of their marketing budget on casting people.
Yep.
Which is probably why they got Christopher Walken. Personally, I think it should have been Ian McKellen, because then him and Florence Pugh could have both had English accents, but whatever.
Well, you see, he's sort of doing a quasi-English, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a bit...
Well, that's just Christopher Walken's accent.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a weird, bastardized transatlantic accent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think you can... I don't necessarily love it as much as The Dark Knight, but I think you can pull it apart and look at it in as many ways as The Dark Knight.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's saying something quite profound with Dune, Part 2. And looking forward to whenever it is that Messiah
comes out. Messiah, the book, is, like we said before we started recording, so when the book came out and had raucous success, Frank Herbert was mortified because everyone read the first book and read it the exact way that he didn't want them to read it. In that they loved it, but they loved Paul and thought that he was the greatest. And then Messiah is basically saying no.
It's the way that the makers of the Jeffrey Dahmer story looked at the thirst traps on TikTok and went, no.
Everyone fancied, what's his name? Ted
Bundy.
Ted Bundy, yeah. This is the exact thing we didn't want to happen. But I think the films have done a much better job by exporting all of that internal dynamics to Zendaya and the kind of naivety of Stilgar. Mm-hmm. What the films have done much more effectively is demonstrate, no, Paul's an anti-hero. Paul's a bad dude. And Frank Herbert had to be very explicit in the second book and basically saying, just verbatim, Paul's like, the estimated death toll is around 61 billion.
Jesus.
90 planets have been completely sterilized and 40 religions have been eradicated by Paul's jihad.
Wow.
And it's straight up called a jihad in the book.
Is it?
Yeah.
Right. I've got a feeling they may change it for the film.
I have a feeling they might as well, I want to touch on the debate that is already emerging and that I know will continue to emerge about this film, which is about how and we touched on it at the start with kind of Middle Eastern, North African representation, is the Orientalism debate.
Yeah, sorry, you did want to bring this up.
Because it's so important to your understanding of the book, and it can be, there's no right answer, obviously. A lot of people, I feel very strongly of Frank Herbert, but I do think he made some mistakes, but I overall come onto the side of the work as an anti-Orientalist narrative, even though it's still, I would say by necessity, there's a lot of people who could prove me wrong, not disagree. I think it's generally an anti-Orientalist, it's obviously anti-imperialist. I think if you're missing that, then I'm sorry. I have no hope for you. But I think the Orientalist one is the much more subtle debate and the debate that has the real potential to evolve as this film comes over, particularly as Messiah comes out. Yeah. Because Messiah doesn't touch on it as much as the first film, but I think Denis will lean into it quite heavily. So the general Orientalism debate, here we go, is so you get the original foundational text of Orientalism, which is Edward Said's essay, Orientalism, which depicts it criticizes the meta-narrative that emerges since, God, what's his name? I should know this. Greek fella. I should know this.
Homer?
No, first histories.
Herodotus? No.
Herodotus,
yes.
yeah. Wait, it goes back to Herodotus, and Herodotus's histories were meant to be performed at a theatre. They were just happened to be about shit that happened 20 years before. So they're a history, but they're meant to be performed locally. And it goes back to Herodotus, where you have the Orient, the East, generally, which tends to encompass not Christendom. So North America and Europe is the Occident, the West. And then everything else is the East, basically. But the general criticisms that Said came up with, and it was a revolution, it blew everyone away when it came out, blew everyone's tits off. And it basically, so the way that the stories generally represent Eastern characters is that Eastern women are alternatively hyper-conservative or overly sexualized. And then the Eastern man is also over-sexualized and is either completely barbaric, i.e. Genghis Khan, or completely depraved and over-sexualized and decadent and all of that stuff. So you either get Ottoman Sultan hiding out in his harem with all of his wives all day and just, and the smoke in the air and incense and, sunbeam. There's always sunbeams coming in. Or you get a Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun character, and it's either barbaric or not. So you are the active Eastern man who has agency is almost universally a barbarian. and everyone else is passive. They have things done to them. So when women are quite commonly put in positions of power, it goes back to European perceptions of the Ottoman Empire. Women are quite often portrayed as in positions of power, i.e. the Bene Gesserit.
Okay.
But it's done in quite a hypersexualized manner. And they're manipulative and they're vile.
Yeah, which they use to their advantage. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is why I prefer the earlier Dune books, because as Frank Herbert took more and more cocaine, it kind of leans more into that over sexualization of how women wield power.
Right.
How that applies to the Dune films, because how it applies to the Dune book is a bottomless hole, and I don't want to touch it. How it applies to the Dune films is so interesting to me. Because the best change, undoubtedly, well, from a technical standpoint, the best change is the time jump changes. But the best change thematically is undoubtedly how the Fremen are portrayed. And the differences in Fremen society and the fact that they are actually talking to one another, which is, and can disagree and have different viewpoints. And different characters come to represent different things. But Chani still believes in Paul, even if she says she doesn't. So there's not only a nuance between different Fremen, there's a nuance within them. She still loves him, or she wouldn't have been so hurt when he said to Irulan. Yeah. But the way that it applies to the Dune films, and the one thing that I can't even disagree with because I don't know how else to do it, but you could criticize Dune for, is the one trope that it does lean quite heavily into is the noble savage.
Okay.
Think the Zulus, think Crazy Horse, all of that stuff. The noble savage particularly emerged, actually, come to think of it, with Manifest Destiny narratives about Native Americans. But it crops up everywhere. It's like Avatar does it. Yeah. Like unashamedly. All of these stuff is you have this proud, noble people who are then infected with Western. And that's the thing that like even the stories that claim to be inherently anti-imperialist and probably are still manage to portray these noble savages as passive agents because they are affected and they have things done to them by foreign agents. And that's kind of the one criticism that I can level in the Orientalism debate that I think Dune does fail on. Because everything else, all the other tropes that it does entertain, are meant to subvert the messianic hero narrative, and they are in constant service of that role. The Fremen are this, they turn into this horrific genocidal people because of what Paul did to them and weaponized their religion. But critically, Paul did it to them. They have that religion because it was seeded by the Bene Gesserit. But it's like an Oriental person can only be noble if they are not technologically advanced or engage in broader society, is my main criticism. So Chani's revelation, Chani's best moment, is when, and it's a good moment. I'm not trying to criticize it too much. But is when she goes back into the desert and she reclaims her virtue. By going back to the desert and back to nature. Nature and the Fremen are a passive agent that are taken over by Paul and Jessica. So even by introducing the debate, it still doesn't manage to subvert that noble savage trope. I'm sure I missed some stuff, but like that's my take. I don't even know how you would do it differently. It's just a take. I don't even know if it's a criticism yet. Okay. It's just a take in that it kind of leans into the old trope. It's a nitpick.
Yeah, sure.
But there you go. I love Dune. I love this universe. I love what Frank Herbert does. I love what Denis done with it. But they both do that. Frank Herbert more so than Denis Villeneuve.
Okay. Okay. That had not crossed my mind at all, I'll be honest, but I'm not very well read on that particular subject.
I think you need to touch on it in any review of Dune that's worth its salt, is you need to touch on this because the book and the film are steeped in these meta-narratives. And they're so important to the writing of the original story and then its adaptations. And I just think it's really important ground to cover because I think that's the debate about Dune that people will be talking about in 10 years. Does this story that claims to subvert racial tropes do it?
Or does it just sort of...
Or does it lean into them and subvert it in quite a cheap manner?
Okay.
I would say no.
I don't think... Yeah,
I think the debate's going to evolve.
Okay. I do... The last thing I want to do is a very brief Oscars summary as well, because following on from last time out, my predictions were broadly correct, but I think there was two that I was wrong on. The first one was I said that they would give original screenplay to The Holdovers, and they didn't. It went to Anatomy of a Fall, which was my bushwa. So I was like, oh, cool.
It's not a bad decision.
So I'm fully on board with it.
Yeah.
I love The Holdovers. I think it could have got a little bit more love, but I wasn't too mad. And the other one was, I thought Lily Gladstone was a dead cert.
Yeah. Did you see Emma Stone's reaction when she got that
She was
award?
very surprised.
She was very surprised.
But I think anyone who would
also the
whine
fact
and
that,
moan
like,
about it is...
Emma Stone has the potential to win another Oscar in her career. I don't think Lily Gladstone
Depends.
maybe won't have another shot.
It depends on the circumstances for it, because she's clearly proved that she's a
Good
Titanic actor, but this, because of the nature of the story and all that kind of stuff, this really felt like the golden film for her. I mean, obviously we don't know what she's going to go on and do next. It could be amazing, but I'm hoping so. I'm hoping for more success, because I loved her in Colours, and that was such a great film. Actually, I think... Should I say? No, I think I got the rest of them right. Obviously, I made my own choices, and I think Oppenheimer Sweep was kind of written as it was written. But I did post Christopher Nolan winning an Oscar with Lisan Al-Gaib underneath it. But I think I would have been more angry in a year when I wasn't going, it's just about time that Nolan got something like this.
Yeah.
Because
he's made films that have won Oscars, but obviously he's never
won one. And also, it's like, I think the only Oscars his films have won, you've had Heath Ledger in Dark Knight, and then I think Wally Pfister for cinematography twice, or something. I think cinematography is where it's won.
Yeah.
But he's never had a win for a screenplay, which I think when you think of something like Memento or The Prestige or even Inception, I think is mad.
Yeah.
And directing, do you know what he lost Dunkirk to? It was The Shape of Water.
Oh, I hate
Guillermo del Toro, which is such a Marmite choice, right?
I hated that film so much.
You're not a fan of fish sex, Michael?
I wasn't a fan of the fish sex. No. Come to think of it.
So I was just pleased. I was just finally going, because if I was going to pick a film for him to win an Oscar for, it wouldn't be Oppenheimer. But the circumstances are such that it had to have been. Of course it had to have been. So, yeah, I was generally pleased. I thought there was a couple of little... Actually, the reaction I was loudest for was spare visual effects. Godzilla -1. I literally just went, yes! It's got a bit of a cult following, that film. But on the whole, I thought they were good. And I think from the 1.5 minutes that he was on presenting an award, your lookalike, John Mulaney,
piss off.
has got to be hosting next time.
Oh,
he was so funny.
Hope so. He was really charismatic, just effortlessly.
He's great. So yeah, on the whole, I think they were good. And I think that the wrap up of this is that come this time next year, Dune Part 2 will be up for probably most of them.
Quite a few. Yeah.
I'd be amazed if it wasn't.
I'd be amazed if it didn't win. I think something absolutely batshit would have to come out for it not to win VFX.
I mean,
or soundtrack.
There is no way. There's no way. I know we've got 12 months of films to come out, but
VFX has got to be in the bag.
It must be. Obviously, you look at performances and maybe there's scope for other people to win nominations and stuff, but even they were great.
I'd be more surprised if it won Best Actor or Best Supporting.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, I think to be honest, I think the fields that'll do well are the ones that Dune Part 1 won. To be honest, the more technical side.
Yeah. Which is strange though, because I think it's such an all-round film.
It is, but I think there's so much more potential for other films to challenge it in the more artsy categories.
Speaking of which, Monkey Man's coming out soon,
and apparently it's
amazing. Yeah. And
I'm so here for the Dev Patel Renaissance.
Oh yeah, man, absolutely. With Jordan Peele behind it as well. Great, Jordan Peele producing, Dev Patel directing as well.
Oh yeah,
just sign me up. Right,
that wasn't scripted.
As you can probably tell by the fact that this is an hour and 25 minutes.
We've got to an hour and 25.
We have.
Oh dear.
But I think there's that much to say about it, and as combining with Dune 1 as well.
There's a lot more I could say about it.
Oh, 100%.
Without even going into, I didn't go into as much as I expected, but I went through a lot of niche lore there. There's a lot that I could say about this film that's about the film that I haven't said. That's not about the niche lore.
Well, I mean, there's the production design of everything, all the Harkonnen ships, all the guns, all the explodey scenes, the worm riding scenes.
And technically, it's a masterpiece.
Absolutely.
Really good.
Go and see it at the biggest fuck-off screen that you can find.
Yeah, with the loudest speakers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your seat should be shaking.
Yeah.
Do not go and see it at View because they keep the lights on the whole time.
Which is really annoying.
But
it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously, when you can, I like to support independent film houses and stuff. And I was going, where shall I see this? Oh well, obviously the multiplex. I'm sorry, I'm not going to the smaller 35mm projector that they've got. I'm going to the biggest screen I can find. You know,
one of the 4 IMAXs in Scotland.
Exactly. Yeah. Like it had to be. I'm going to wrap this up because it's long now.
What are we at?
1:38. 1:39.
Sorry about that.
It's alright. Well, on that note then.
Jesus.
Yeah, going to bring this to a close. Thank you very much, Michael, for this because you've done 95% of the work. As I say, it would be wrong of me to just because I could spiel about all the filmmaking parts of this, and I'd love to, but when the source material is this close to it and this close to the people that like it as well, then I think that's the important place to be, alongside all of the just good, like incredibly well made cinematic aspect of it, which are undeniable, but they're sort of things you can see for yourself, to be honest, if you go and watch it.
I think talking about the things we've spoken about kind of puts Dune in its place, I would say.
Yes, yeah.
Because what I think it is this generation's Lord of the Rings, or this generation's Star Wars.
Most likely.
It's a big epic.
Yep.
With a lot of stuff going on, a big source material, not Star Wars. The source material for Star Wars is, Dune. But yeah, so I hope it sticks, basically, and I think it will. After this.
Yeah.
The first film I thought was great, but it needed this film.
Well, it's going to make a lot of money. So, yeah, this will be around for a while, and I'm sure that we'll look back on this discussion in a few years and be like, damn, good.
I'm going to look back on this discussion and be like, what the heck was I on about?
Look back on this discussion with a blunt. And go, my recommendation this week is, I can't remember if I've recommended it before, and given the fact I'm only 23 and that's criminal, it's going to be Hell or High Water, because I'm writing an essay on it currently, and I think rewatching it, the duality it does in so many different arenas is one of the best things I've ever seen. So, and also it's a film I've never wanted a beer more than rewatching Hell or High Water. I had to go out and buy some and be like, pause, and then went back, opened a beer and went, good, ready now. So, yeah, it appears like it's going to be horrendously horrible and toxically masculine, and it isn't. It's a really interesting study of that, and the female characters are very important, and their status is important, though they're not the central focus of the film. It's more about heritage, and I think it's fantastic. Do you have a recommendation for people?
The Chernobyl miniseries, because I rewatched it a couple weeks ago, and it's really good.
Very good.
That's all I have for you.
Solid.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for listening. Thank you for downloading. Please do share this around. Tell anyone. If you have any ideas or whatever, just let me know, because I'm open to whatever.
Watch Dune with really high bass speakers.
Yeah, watch Dune and yeah, don't let anything distract you, because
there's so many technical aspects that we missed.
Yeah, and it's just the best.
Yeah.
So yeah, if films pop up like this in the future that I just see and love, then there'll be discussions about them, but plenty of other ideas as well. So keep your eyes peeled. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Michael, very much again for providing the expertise on this episode. I should probably rename this podcast to with Dom Majore and Michael Wyllie on the end of it, to be honest, because the only episodes people listen to are the ones with you. So, it's been an honour playing with you tonight, gentlemen.
Jesus, right. I'm going to watch Hell or High Water.
Do it, yeah. I'm going to go to bed. Bye.